Well, thank you for having me as always. The concern now is that the European allies saw what the Trump administration did to what had been a long-term regional ally in Eastern Europe, Ukraine, uh, in an effort to try and bring everybody to the peace table. You know, cutting off or the threat of cutting off military supplies, which was short-lived. The threat of cutting off intelligence, but the real strike in that whole evolution was the threat to cut ties from the Five Eyes program to longstanding Western European allies such as England, France, Germany. Cutting off intelligence ties is huge in that. The threat to England was just mind blowing here in the United States to the defense sector. It's a big concern, and there is a reason for this. But there's several factors involved that we just don't have time to go into.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Singer, how do you think the global South perceives the shift from the multilateralism to Trump's unilateralism?
Yeah, it's a huge shift, and every country is pretty concerned and feel threatened by that decision of Trump administration now. So global South actually is suffering from a number of the conflicts and wars and lack of investment and or shortage of the resources in terms of like countries like G7 has been supporting this type of development and economic development in global South. But currently, with the new administration, with Trump administration, the situation is completely different, where the United States is really washing off her hand from every economic policy or any type of support like USAID. This was a major funding of many programs in Egypt or in the global South countries. So, yeah, it's a pretty huge level of anxiety. Now, every country does need to adapt itself according to the new policies. The Trump policies, So this is really increased that level of anxiety in Europe, in Asia, and of course, many countries in Africa and in general, the global South. So this is a wider world now. It's not stable from my point of view, in terms of forming a new pacts, try to find a way how to make that balance with the new policy. Like Europe, for example, made a huge change of increasing its military budget. Even that kind of amount probably reach or to be equal to United States means that we are moving to the multilateral policies all over the globe. And this is not good news for me. Basically, if we have one dominant country, can really create and increase that number of agreement towards peace. But if we have like multi-polar system, this is, of course, will increase the number of conflict and wars according to the stats. The statistics really help us to understand, the peace and war in the global politics. The situation now, it's pretty unpleasant, It's not really giving us like a great hope how to solve the problems, but we are expecting more problems and more crises than solving, these type of crises like Gaza, Ukraine. Till now, we don't have really one policy to make sure that we are fine or will be fine.
Yes, well, Mr. Russell, speaking of Europe now, with Europe's weapon dependency, will they be able to swiftly mitigate the risk of a potential kill switch on the US systems?
Yeah, oh, there's a definite potential. In fact, I think that as long as Donald Trump and Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth and the rest of the national security enterprise here in Washington continues down this path, there's a very good chance of that. You got to understand, you have companies like Airbus, EADS, BAE Systems in France. You have Thales, Leonardo in Italy, Rheinmetall and Saab in Sweden, Rheinmetall in Germany. These are large defense contractors that are producing a lot of similar systems already. Thales, provides missile systems. BAE Systems builds aircraft, as does Airbus. You look at Rheinmetall, which builds, which is known for their tank systems. There's a very distinct possibility, and I think what's going to happen is they're going to become, the more and more we see, America push into this isolationist area, I think the Trump administration could be cutting its nose off despite its face. The reality is, you are talking about just shy of $100 billion in annual revenue for defense contractors such as Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, RTX, the old Raytheon. That is a big impact. You start taking away the foreign military sales aspect, that is going to create a huge economic pressure on these companies. And these are companies that don't deal well with unknown economic pressure. That means layoffs, that means unemployment, that means economic burdens here in key areas, in some instances, areas that helped elect Donald Trump. If we start seeing a shift to the European-centric contractors, as I had mentioned before, that's going to be a big possible economic hit to the U.S. economy, and that's not going to bode well for Donald Trump. I think that they're going to have to take a very serious look at how this goes down, or else they're going to risk even further, not just the geopolitical, the diplomatic, and the allied relationships, but they're going to have to look at the domestic economic impact. And it's also going to call into question, the ability for these companies to develop or continue to develop forward-thinking technologies. Our colleague in Cairo just mentioned the F-47. That's still not in mass production. And if there's not a global joint strike fighter or a joint fighter capability that Boeing's going to manufacture, if they start building it in Europe and keeping it to themselves, that reduces the market. And we could see the same thing happen in Asia as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Singer, that begs the question now, can emerging powers fill the void left by a potentially retreating U.S. and global leadership?
Yeah, we believe, as a political scientist or watching, what is going on all over the global politics, we believe that United States and Europe should really stay together, increase their capacity, their capabilities. I don't understand till now, the new administrations, what their perspective, what their goal, and opening, widening that kind of gap between United States and Europe, or that what we call, the transatlantic relationship. I understand that Europe was really a free rider on United States public or security public goods, If I follow this type of argument by Olson, and where the great theory of the collective action theory. So yeah, Trump was correct when he was proposing, to Europe and NATO members to increase their burden to reach to military burden, to reach to 2% or even 5%. This is good policy, to make Europe and America pretty strong. If Europe and America really consider China as the major threats, of course not Russia. Russia never ever can really fill that gap for current or for present or for future. So the only country can really threat Europe and United States is China. But this kind of policy by Trump about Greenland or towards Denmark or Canada. As my colleague, mentioned about the Five Eyes, this is sharing intelligence for the closest allies, UK, Canada, US, Australia, New Zealand. So this is the Five Eyes. So if we have two countries that United States really threatening, their goal of security in Europe, UK, particularly what I mentioned, it's Ukrainian situation or Russia-Ukraine war, where UK does require from the United States before any kind of agreement, any type of agreement with Russia, Europe should really present it correctly. The condition of peace there should be under, I would say, not under Russians, but it should really come with the Europeans and Ukrainians well too. Second, threatening Canada as a 51 states is really opening that gap. And my concern of the future, probably Canada and Europe will switch to be like creating like another form of NATO out of the United States. Of course, this is hard to believe that can be happen, but that level of threatening or threats from Trump towards Canada and Europe is really making these guys very nervous. Probably China can really come close to Europe more than United States. Probably it's hard to believe in that or think about that, but that kind of type of scenarios is really scary for the United States and for Europe. But my best understand that Europe and United States, it's really difficult for both of them to be away from being a one country or one policy, one military policy. This is, I think it's pretty healthy for the international politics to keep Europe and United States together.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mr. Russell, how does Trump's rewards versus consequences approach destabilize the established international norms?
Oh, it throws it on its head. We've never seen a situation like this before. Even FDR during World War II in our isolationist approach before joining the war, before the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, was even hesitant about maintaining that isolationist, nationalist type approach to the war on both fronts. This is unprecedented. We've never seen it in modern times. We've never seen it since the end of the Cold War. We never even thought about it during the Cold War. The one thing I do want to point out, though, is that we as a global community, and in particular, those of us in the business, like our colleague in Cairo and I are in, need to be very careful about the sky is falling so much. The one thing I would point out is that these alliances, NATO has been around for decades, many decades, since right after World War II. Newer alliances, such as AUKUS, we're seeing a lot of movement in the Pacific Rim with our AUKUS alliance, and then plus our strategic alliances with countries like South Korea and Japan in the region. We have to be very careful about a doomsday scenario that could be promoted in this time. We have to survive the Trump administration for 4 years. I do not think that this is sustainable, this approach in U.S. foreign policy or even strategic policy moving forward. At some point, we will have to get back to the norms. I think that we may even see pressure on the Trump administration to get back to norms. The one thing that we have in our favor in this and not causing a complete global disaster is, our colleague in Cairo was talking about China. we have taken the position, the Global Foreign Policy Center and myself have taken the position that it is far-fetched that we would see a fighting war between China and the U.S. because there is the concept of mutually assured economic destruction, I think, which I've mentioned on this show before, where if we start getting into trade wars, tariffs, the Chinese need us to spend our money on cheap products like flat screen TVs and clothing that they ship over here. We have such a dependence on Chinese manufacturing and Chinese goods that are so cheap, we've become entitled and spoiled in that aspect, that both economies, you're talking about the two biggest economies in the world, would literally destroy each other. And then the global ripple effect from that would just escalate into a global economic nuclear winter, if you will. Mm-hmm. The reality is that we have to keep a cautious eye as a global community. I think our allies are going to be watching it, but I don't think this is a total death nail into the relationships between our NATO partners, our partners in the Pacific, in the Pacific Rim and Asia Pac, even our position in Africa. The U.S. has been losing ground in Africa for decades, going all the way back to, I would say, even the Reagan administration. And we've driven our allies on the continent in Africa to go towards having strategic relationships with our two biggest adversaries, that being China and Russia. I think we shouldn't be talking about consolidating European Command and Africa Command together. We should have an independent Africa Command that is in Africa. That's the only way this is going to work.
Dr. Singer, now considering the EU's internal divisions and new alliances, how effective can their retaliatory measures against US tariffs be? Will we be seeing a doomsday scenario, or, as Mr. Russell have mentioned, it's more likely that they go back to the traditional norms? Dr. Singer, can you hear me, sir?
Europe can really come back again to the traditional norms of. Yes, I hear you very well. Mm-hmm. You hear me? I'm sorry. Yes. You hear me? Hello? You hear me? Okay. So yeah, going back to the norms, I hope this is really.
We seem to have lost Dr. Singer. Mr. Russell, considering the push for European defense autonomy, what are the strategic implications for NATO's cohesion?
I think NATO will survive this. There's no question about it. I think like I said before, we just have to get through the 4 years of Trump. I think once we get that, we'll start maneuvering back. There is a silver lining to this. Again, foreign military sales in 2023 amounted to almost $100 billion. That's military exports to allied nations, which is hugely regulated. I think what we'll see is a return to norms, and we will see any economic impacts during this time be mitigated downstream. But the good thing for Europe, and this is possibly a positive thing, and we're even starting to see NATO leadership starting to take this approach, is that, Donald Trump may have had a point where the European members of NATO, everybody but the U.S., who was fronting the bill for decades from a majority of NATO's operations, this has forced the hand. We just saw a vote in Germany last week, which forced the hand of German parliament to start spending more on maintaining their own national defense and their own national security. That's good for companies like Rheinmetall, who builds military systems, and they still have a part of EADS and Airbus. I think what we'll do is we'll see an economic boom in Europe, which the U.S. can't afford to completely give up.
Yes.
We will start seeing them develop a lot of technology that could easily be a competitor for the systems that we see out of the big 5 defense contractors here in the United States. Even Canada Canada has companies like CGI, which develops military systems.
Yes.
I think you're going to see a lot of innovation coming out of Canada that could be exported. A lot of that thought process that has gone back and forth between the borders because of the close relationship, I think Canada could be a big economic boost to helping sustain this time over the next 3.5 years, if you will, until we possibly look at getting back to a norm.